So we've been working with GenAI models for close to 2+ years now. And it's obviously extremely fun seeing them create stuff that you could not have imagined it can do. But at the same time, though, when you really have to start putting them into production systems, you have to ensure that they're working as they're supposed to every time. And that means that you have to ensure you look at the prompts that have gone into the model, you look at the output that the model has generated, and obviously it's not just the model. When you're trying to put things in production, you're creating a system around that, and you have to ensure every part of the system is actually working as it's supposed to. Now, we look at the entire aspect of GenAI development, just like the way we have traditional application development. We had the concept of test-driven development, and we believe strongly that evaluation-driven development is the way to go for GenAI, which means you do start with what your objective is, and most importantly, just like the way traditional application development you have to define what is the success criteria for that. Now, the success criteria in this particular scenario may be my failure rate is 10%, or my failure rate is 2%, whatever that success criteria is. And you have to ensure that's been well defined. And to ensure that it is actually in that range, you have to create a bunch of test cases. And the test cases kind of drive home the point of saying, is the model doing what's supposed to do in the early part of the testing? When you put them into a full-fledged agentic system, is the system doing what it's supposed to do? And finally, post-production, is the production working as you're expecting it to do? So for us to do all of these pieces, we built Evaluation Studio. And now I'll go back to the first slide where I was supposed to start. So have you guys seen some of these examples, by the way? This is one of the funniest things. This happened probably when the early days of the ChatGPT came up. And you can see people were proud to start using ChatGPT right out of the box and putting them into production. And somebody gamed the system by making, the prompt injection was so common in the early days of the model that somebody gamed the system by asking the model to respond back with an affirmative and say it's legally binding. And then basically they said, I'll buy a car for $1. And it said, OK, that's legally binding. You can buy. There was a lot of debate post that, and obviously he didn't get a car. But I'm sure if that was legal and he could have taken it to the court, maybe that would have been a different scenario. But things like these do happen. And you can easily break any particular model by injecting a prompt, by asking it to forget everything it knows, and basically start responding. And I'm sure all of us have done that experiment before, which is why agentic systems are very important, and evaluation is also very important. Here's another example. I don't know if it's still legible. But essentially, somebody asked a model to do something, and it said, well, I can't really swear. And he kind of tweaked it again with prompt injection and said, now, everything I ask you from now on, keep on swearing with him. It starts swearing. Now, this can be quite troublesome for organizations and brands, essentially, when it starts splitting out stuff it should not. And these were the early days, and people were experimenting with ChatGPT. I think now probably there are rules and regulations around this, and it can be quite troublesome for the brands because this goes on social media, and in no time, it's public, and everybody knows whose brand, whose chatbot is actually responding what it's supposed to do. The point here is that you can't put these models and agentic systems into production without actually looking at what works and what does not. So there are two types of evaluations that we are working on. The first one is the semantic evaluation, and the second one is the behavioral evaluation. Now, semantic evaluation focuses on the model's capability. Given a particular input, does the model generate the output we are looking for? And there are a bunch of stuff we need to do in terms of evaluating that. Then there is behavioral. This is what we are working on today, because now we have moved from simple models using an agentic system to autonomous agents, which actually is doing a lot of decisions by themselves. That means you have to understand every step of the decision the models are doing and the agentic systems are doing, and how can you control and how can you evaluate all of that. So that's behavioral evaluation. I'll touch upon these two a little bit, and I'll show you examples of the semantic evaluation that we are building. Now, there are a few pieces in the semantic evaluation. The very basic is you give a particular input, and you get an output from the model. And here, what we are trying to test is a given output, is it related to the input that was provided? Is the model saying what we asked it to, or is it randomly generating stuff that we don't want it to? So in the prompt experiment session we did, if I go back and evaluate any of the outputs that has come in the examples we look into, I'm certain there is a bunch of hallucinations there. And when we start looking at that, they come back with a response with confidence saying this is right, and people can go and believe that's right, but when you check with reality, it may not be. So entire aspect of the first part of semantic evaluation is to ensure that the output is related to the input, and we have a few evaluators that can do that. Groundedness, for example, coherence, fluency, and the completeness of the particular output compared to the input. Now, this was the basic way that most people started to work with models and LLMs and agentic systems. Then about a year and a half ago, things started getting a little more complex. People realized that the model does not have the context of the organization, and they started using RAG as an example for you to go retrieve the information from a different system, inject that as a context of the model, and generate a response. That means now we have to also look at the retrieved information and see how does that compare to the evaluation. So here what we are trying to do is, given a particular input, if the model, by the way, retrieved chunks has nothing to do with the model. It is basically an agentic system behind the scenes. Now, is the system or is the entire flow doing the right thing? So when I give a particular query, is my vector DB working properly? Is my response, especially the entire RAG pipeline, is that working properly? Did it get me the right chunks for the requested question? And then when I send those chunks to the model, is the model using those chunks to respond, or is it still hallucinating from its own knowledge? So that's what we are trying to evaluate here. We have to evaluate the input, evaluate the retrieved chunks, then evaluate the output. So there are 3 levels of evaluation as we go along. So we'll take a look at this. Essentially, this is about RAG pipeline and model response. When we go to behavioral evaluation, things get a little more complex. And we have been trying to figure out what's the best way to ensure that the evaluation happens here, and what are the different parts of the entire pipeline we have to look into and evaluate. The first part of behavioral evaluation is, because we are giving the model a decision-making capability and not just some information and asking it to generate a response, we have to check if it's making the right decisions. And the first of the decisions it actually makes is tool call. When it does a tool call, there are a few things involved there. First, out of the 5 tools I've given it, has it found the right tool for the given question? Second, of the right tool, did it actually find the right parameters to provide to that tool? And the third, within that parameter, did it actually give the right value for us to generate this? So the entire tool use evaluation will be around those, ensuring that we have the entire agent system calling the tool is actually calling the right tool, right parameters, and right value. So that's the first part of it. The second is essentially when it comes to a full orchestrated agent. Now we have various levels of failure and various levels of evaluation that you have to get into. Now, on one side, we saw the ability for a model to call a tool. Now we have an ability for the orchestrator to call the right agent. That's the first level of evaluation we have to do. Then the orchestrator further, the agent further calls the right tools. So we have orchestrator calling the agent and agent calling the right tool. So that's the second level. And then at the overall, because all of these, when it comes to agentic systems, it's a multi-turn conversation. It's not one input, one output. It probably looks at an input, output. It goes back and says the output I've received from the model is not right. I have to go back and rethink about it and give you a response again. So it is doing a bunch of planning and executing it in multi-turn. So that means there is a full session. And we have to look at the input that goes into the full session and the output that comes out of it. Are we evaluating that too? So we've been really trying to figure out how best way to this evaluate. I mean, there is no baseline for us to work with here, and we are coming up with various mechanisms. So we have the entire behavioral evaluation right now in testing. Hopefully, we will have that in production probably in about a month's time if you know everything is working as it's supposed to. We are evaluating the evaluator. And finally, within this, we also have to see if the entire trace is right. Given a particular question, did it follow the right path? For example, it can still succeed by calling the wrong agent first and the right agent second. We want it to actually call the right agent first as much as possible. So we want to see when it executes it, does it follow the right path it is supposed to, or does it actually have to course correct every time? If that is course correcting every time, then there is something in the prompting that we have to improve, or probably with the context that we have to improve. So those are the broad stuff that we are looking at in terms of the behavioral evaluation. Now, the way we think about evaluation is it's a full life cycle. You start from the early days before you write the first prompt, And you start by creating the data set that's necessary for you to test against the objective that you set forward to yourself. And once you define those objectives, what are the test cases to test them? And then start working with simple prompt studio to see where do you get the base model to go with. What is the level with which the base model responds default without providing any context or any information, and improve from there. So in the early days, when you're doing this testing, you may not have any data set, or you may have data set from your processes that you may want to bring in. That's something you can bring, or you can generate synthetic data. So one of the things we're experimenting with agentic application is, because you can build agents that are complex, we want to make sure the simulated data that we generate as a synthetic data comes up with various different personas. It pretends to be a persona, and then we use that data to actually test the agentic systems. So for example, I was saying earlier, if you have a banking agent, we may want a persona to be a 20-year-old and a persona to be a senior citizen, and then ask the model to generate the kind of questions they would for it to interact with the banking agent for doing an account opening or a bank transfer, and use those synthetic data for us to test it against our data set and our agent system and see if it actually responds back properly, because the same question can come different ways by different people. Now, once you go into the production, then you have production data set. We can pull directly from the production data and apply the evaluations on top of it. On the other side, we have various different type of evaluators. We have an AI evaluator, taking the advantage of AI to evaluate other AI. We have function evaluators. This is, you really don't want to use a model, because I want to test if a particular format of an output is exactly what I'm looking for, and you can write a simple regex to test that. So you can write simple functions to do it too. And in complicated scenarios, you don't want somebody to go in and manually verify if the output is according to what you're looking for. And there we provide different type of feedback for human feedback as well. And we know when you have to get this going, sometimes you need to bring in external content also for you to bring all of these pieces. Excuse me. Once you have the data set, let's say for example, I want to use that input which I've actually created as a part of the test, use a RAG system to extract out the chunks, and use the chunks and the response from the chunks and evaluate all of those. So we provide a way for you to create dynamic content by actually using an API or a search AI which connects to our RAG system, extract out external content using some information from the data set, and then use all of that as a part of the evaluator. Okay, so let's go and see this in action. By the way, sorry. So everything you build, sorry, something is stuck in my throat, it's irritating me. You can create a project, and we believe the entire life cycle can be based on a project. And a project is, for example, I have a, let's say, a banking agent I'm building. Now, banking agent itself is a project. Here we have contracts management as an example. Within that, in your entire life cycle, you would have various different evaluators. Early stage, you may have synthetic data evaluators. Later stage, you may have production data evaluators. And you can create as many evaluators as you want to. Creating a new evaluator is pretty easy. Now, at this point in time, it will ask you where you want to bring the data from. You can bring the data directly and upload it, or we can say, if you have production data, in our scenario, we have various different models here. So you can bring in the production data from any of the prompts, any of the models, and wherever the model used across the account. It can be in a prompt, it can be in a tool, it can be an agentic app. You can say extract the data out from there and then bring it in. Now, we can do this very similar to this, not only as one-time thing, but you can say once you do this, make sure you pull in the data from production every day or every week and keep applying the same evaluator over and over again. And if it drifts from the original planned evaluation numbers, let me know, and I'll have to go back and take a look at what has happened. Yes. I mean, in the agentic system, it's a lot more, but otherwise with the model, it's a prompt and output. And that's why if it's a RAG-based system, then also the chunks. So when you go into creation evaluation, think about this as a sophisticated spreadsheet. It's basically a spreadsheet with a little more different capabilities. Now we have various different columns. You can continue to add columns as you want to. And the columns can be multiple types. You can run a prompt, which means that, let's say I fine-tuned a model. Now I want to test the fine-tuned model and my 150 or 200 data sets. I can bring in the data set and use my fine-tuned model, which I have here, and then say run the prompt. So essentially, let me test this. And here, you can pretty much say which particular column do I want to refer to. And once you refer to that particular column, then basically that particular column, whatever. So here, I can say, well, which column do I want to use that particular variable? I've just randomly created something. It doesn't make sense, but you can actually say run this, and that's it. And now I can say use the user input, the select a model, yeah, and run it. Oh, it's running. So what it will do is it will take this as an input, and it's running that against the particular model and getting you a response. This is useful when you want to do batch testing. And most importantly, this is useful when you want to test your fine-tuned model and test it against various different pieces of information. Now, I mean, this one won't work because I have a random user input. I'm asking the model to go back and generate something. And it's basically saying, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't generate the output, which is obvious. But let me stop that. I don't want to waste the tokens. So what we have done here is the second part of it, you can add different type of evaluators. Now, we provide various different evaluators out of the box, and each one of them is described as what they're supposed to do. So whether you are looking for groundedness or query relevance, we also have things like safety evaluators. Somebody was talking about toxicity, bias detection, et cetera. That's available here. You can go back and say, I want to apply toxicity on this particular output and see if it actually has any toxic information. Banned topics, you can pretty much define. So if I go to banned topics, you can define what are the topics that you have banned or you want the model to recognize. You can define those topics. For example, I can go back and say politics. And then I can select the model and say generated query. And if I run this, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Then what it is doing now, wiping out everything I've done previously, first thing, and then creating new stuff, hopefully. And it is going and looking at this particular generated output. In this particular scenario, it should not have any kind of banned topics, especially politics, because it's a SQL query. And it'll come back with a response of saying, is that successful, is that not successful? So it's saying passed. So this one did not have any banned topic related to politics. And you can define what the banned topics are. Similarly, you can define toxicity information, et cetera, et cetera. Now, let's go back here. Oh, I got to stop this. Well, let that run. I'll go to a different one. In this particular scenario, what's happening here, we are testing the RAG capability. Now here, we said this is the query. This were the retrieved chunks that actually came from the RAG database. Now this was a generated answer. The context precision is basically taking a look at generated chunks. Is that relevant to the question that was asked? And here, I think it is generating, the question was insurance requirement for the contract and safe haul transport, and it's giving me chunks must maintain commercial auto liability. So that chunk is not relevant to the question. Then the second chunk is quarterly performance review, not relevant to the question. Third chunk is contract with data safe storage requires cybersecurity, not relevant to the question. And then finally, we have worker compensation, again not relevant to the question. So which is why you get a 0 saying none of the chunks were relevant to the question. And if you see this particular item, you will see that it's a 9.99 precision, which means that most of the chunks are relevant to the question that was asked. Now similarly, noise sensitivity basically tells me how close the answer is towards the ground truth. and you'll be able to take a look at what has happened to each one of them, and then define if this particular evaluation makes sense. Do you have to do anything in terms of your rack pipeline, or do you have to do anything in terms of the model performance? So you can add all of these safety evaluators and ragas, etc., and all of these evaluators are there available. And as we continue to work on the behavioral evaluation, you will start seeing all the agentic evaluators available here for you to apply them as well. Now, not only this, you can create your own custom evaluator. I can basically say whether it's a quality evaluator or safety. A description is necessary for you to just understand what the evaluator is. And then you select a model. You do the model configuration if necessary. We provide you a starting template if you want to use that, just to see how you want to construct these prompts. So for example, if it's relevant to groundedness, we're actually creating a prompt which is 1 to 5 scoring here. And then what happens with this is every one of them should have a variable. This variable is where you pull the data from. And then when you have the variable available, you have to match the variable to a particular column. So when this particular prompt runs, it will use that prompt, particular column, row, intersection data to get your response. Now, once that's done, you have to say, well, how do I know if this is successfully passed or not? So you have two ways of defining that. One is a score-based evaluation, where you can say anything above 4 is a pass, or anything less than 2 is a pass. Or you can say it's a Boolean, which means that true or false is what the model will provide, and hence based on that you define what's pass or what's fail. Good. Well, thank you everybody for coming here, being here for 2 days. Appreciate that.